Overwatch deserves every bit of hate that it gets. And the reason for that is because those of us who bought the game were duped into getting a bad product. There lies broken promises and complete bullshit behind the paywall called Overwatch. Now, this is not simply an opportunity to rag on Blizzard, but a warning to those who have not yet bought the game, and an outlet for those of us who feel cheated and swindled because we bought the game. If Overwatch were just another free-to-play game, it wouldn't really be fair to criticize the game as harshly as we do. But this game costs us $60. Remember, this game was hyped more than almost any other game released in recent years. I almost could break this video into a top 10 list of why the game sucks. I really think that this would be tacky, and that a concise point-by-point breakdown is in order for this game. So point number 1.
The characters are shit.
Before we really dig into this point, I must address that some people will tell us that you can't compare these two games because they're totally different. They would say,
"That's like comparing Counter-Strike to Honey Pop."
But we can make that comparison because both are class-based first-person shooters. And while there isn't an official name for this type of game in the same way that we have MOBAs, the similarities make the comparison valid. Both TF2 and Overwatch have the same game modes and the same sort of class system, and they also have the same sort of whimsical gameplay where beer bottles and magical force fields are equally valid weapon systems. And while it's true that Overwatch has over twice as many classes as TF2, you have to understand that most of these classes overlap heavily. So if we can directly compare the two games, then we can also directly compare other pros and cons of one over the other.
Valve time is the running joke for why Valve takes so long to release games. But there is a method behind this madness. That method is to so thoroughly design something that it will stand the test of time and the stresses of use. That's one of the two major reasons Half-Life 2 is such a timeless classic, even though it was released all the way back in 2004. And, while its graphics are starting to show the age of the game, the fact that it's able to be modded with the blessing of its creators is something that Overwatch will never have. It also means that it will still be around a decade from now while Overwatch won't. In short, Valve embraced modding and Blizzard hates it. Case in point, the guy named Ice Frog, who made Dota 2, was told that if he wanted to make a sequel to his game, or his mod, he could do it with StarCraft 2 and make Blizzard an entire game for free. Well, he said fuck you and went to Valve, and Blizzard has been really bitter ever since. I mention this because modding is important to consider when you think about the lifespan of a game. Once Blizzard abandons the game, it's not getting any new content. And it's not like we've seen any new content since launch anyway, but still, we're at the mercy of the publisher. In the case of TF2, it underwent so much modding that eventually Valve had to officially endorse it with the workshop system and started giving the modders actual money for their work. That would inevitably lead to an extension to the game's lifespan. And to this day, TF2 is not on life support despite its age, and in large part that's due to custom maps, game modes, and variations on existing ideas. And the idea of creators building on other people's work is extremely healthy and helps the game stay fresh for longer. So, you have to ask, then, why is moddability not standard on every game? Well, there are a couple downside limitations to modding. First is having the support and framework available for modding, and the other is that it might give easier access and glimpses for those who make cheats to the backend and structure of a game client. If I release a tiny game, I may not have the time and resources to make modding easy, and we as gamers understand this fact. But the problem with both of these arguments is that they result from bad programming. Now, in the case of a 99-cent game on Steam, there was never really meant to go anywhere beyond the few hours you enjoy it. Not designing the ability to mod seems reasonable. And heck, I've had cheap games I bought and enjoyed where all the assets are literally compiled into the executable. But in the case of Overwatch, this is $60 for a AAA title. I expect more here. And if you're even the least bit frugal, you have to consider the cost per enjoyment of the game. Now, I don't mean cost per hour of gameplay. That's an easy mistake to make. I mean, every time you laugh, every time you think in the back of your head about how much fun you're having or how cool and fun the last thing you did was, that's what I'm talking about. Also, in the case of TF2, it started out at $20 as part of the orange box, and that's before it went free to play. The case against modding because it helps cheat programmers is already moot because cheaters are already owning Overwatch. Nice fucking job, Blizzard! Consider what was going on during development of TF2. Valve was going to great lengths with every aspect of their game for almost a decade before we even got TF2. A great example of this is the extreme attention to detail when it comes to their 9 characters. Only 9 characters. Valve was so careful about their characters being easily identifiable, they even went so far as to make silhouettes as distinct as possible. In the case of Overwatch, though, they threw that mindset out the window in favor of a more is better attitude when it came to characters. And yeah, Overwatch has more playable characters, but this actually hurts when a player pops around a corner and sees an enemy, because there's a need for more reaction time while the player decides how to respond to their newfound enemy. That focus on easily identifiable characters is completely absent in Overwatch. The character palettes are confusing, and that is made greatly worse by the unlockable skins. And what I mean is that when a character like Roadhog gets a kimono, he ceases to look like Roadhog altogether, and a player wastes time seeing through what has now become a disguise. Now in TF2, they were developing an easy to recognize character shape first, and then creating the look of the person that was to become that character. Why Blizzard felt that this line of thinking wasn't important makes them look really dumb, because if it were so important to making TF2 work, then with over twice as many characters in Overwatch, it would seem to be at least twice as important, given that those characters could be on either team, and would not have uniforms that were identifiable by color, as is the case with TF2, where your characters are either on the red or blue team and have red or blue uniforms. Valve also went to great lengths to design characters with, well, character. If you look at a character and listen to them, even without a backstory, your imagination fills in the blanks and gives you a really rough backstory for that character. In the case of the TF2 medic, he has a uniform that looks a bit German, and his voice sounds like he was a German, possibly working as a Nazi given his military-sounding character. Your mind can then take these clues, make assumptions, and create a backstory for these characters. Also, the names. In each TF2 character, it's named after their role, not the person. Valve never gave these characters names or backstories, just histories. In TF2, the characters were never even given real names. Spy and Scout are not their real names, but their character names gave them their job. The Spy sneaks, the Scout scouts. In stark contrast to this, Overwatch gives them very detailed backstories and real names, but it never gives them a purpose. Without that information about what they're supposed to do, you don't have the ability to understand what the character's motivations are. I can't look at me and tell why she likes cold stuff, and I can't play as D.Va and tell why she's qualified to drive a mech, or even why she needs one, given that McCree has a fucking revolver against her. And to be honest, I don't even give a fuck about their backstories. I care about why and how to kick ass against my opponents. Now, if I were to play as a guy named Pyro, armed with a flamethrower, that's all the backstory and motivation I need to go out and burn people to death. And then, watching the Meet the Pyro video just provides further proof the Pyro is insane and a pyromaniac. That gives me even more reason to go out and set absolutely everything on fire. In the case of Overwatch, the motivations of the characters just aren't clear, and I don't feel like I should have to read a short novel to understand why I should help them kill people or take objectives. With that said, the fact that Overwatch has so many more characters to play than TF2 actually hurts it. If Overwatch had also done what TF2 did and had 9 very fleshed out characters, it would actually make the game much better. But now, it's just too late for that. This can never be fixed. Also, it looks like Blizzard basically ripped off TF2 characters to some extent. For instance, Zarya is a Russian, a heavy, and likes displaying strength while carrying a long-range heavy weapon. Where have I seen that before? Oh yeah, that's right, fucking TF2. Also, the healer, or the medic, is a slightly insane German, and the explosive handler guy is a crazy person with a severe physical handicap. When you look at characters like Bastion, who transforms into a turret and has the ability to transform from that into a small tank and drive around and kill people, you see that this is an original mechanic that really hasn't been seen before in a game. When you contrast a character like Bastion with the TF2 engineer ripoff called Torbjorn, you can only come away thinking that Blizzard was very capable of making original mechanics. Why not keep going on with being creative then? Well, there's no clear answer about this, and my guess is that more thought was put into some characters in Overwatch than others. But really, this just makes Overwatch characters seem inferior to those in TF2. Now, while TF2 only had 9 characters to choose from, those characters had 3 distinct roles that they could do. The first attack was their primary weapon, and then their secondary weapon offered a completely different role. Lastly, every hero had a melee weapon that offered them a defensive ability. Let's look at Pyro as an example of this supreme utility. The flamethrower had 2 fire modes, a flamethrower setting as well as an air blast. One was to set people on fire and the other one was to blow projectiles back. His secondary slot could be filled with a flare gun that gave him a very long range attack that could set people on fire. As the game matured, more axes were added for his melee weapon, but they each gave Pyro a different form of devastating attack that was satisfying to use. Compare this with Overwatch, and while every character has melee, you could actually make the case that TF2 heroes each have 3 modes of attack. And what Overwatch did was actually take away abilities from characters and split those abilities up amongst even more useless characters, to make the game feel larger than it really was. TF2 is the poster boy for efficient character design abilities. And had Overwatch given us 9 or even 18 characters that were efficiently balanced like TF2, even if they were straight up ripped off from TF2, it would have made the game better. And further evidence for this is the fact that while TF2 could easily handle 9v9 and have every role filled, Overwatch has a maximum number of players capped at 6. So really, what's the whole point of having 21 playable characters? The point's moot. And one last thing. Overwatch isn't being criticized because it ripped off TF2, it's being criticized because it ripped off TF2 in a really shitty way. It shows a complete lack of understanding about what made TF2 so great. While we've really glossed over the surface of the Overwatch characters, there's one more aspect about the game that deserves to be footnoted here. I know I sound like a TF2 fanboy, but because I've extensively played both TF2 and Overwatch, I feel like I'm qualified to compare these two games. Overwatch only allows 12 players in a server and no voice communication between teams. In contrast to this, TF2 had a very party atmosphere in most servers because you could have so many players on the server. The maps went on for upwards of 30 minutes per game, and you really had plenty of time for shenanigans and hijinks. Now, back in the day, I was part of the 2 Fort 2 Furious scene and was constantly entertained just as much by the players in the server as I was by the game itself. But in contrast to this, Overwatch simply can't have this with only 5 other players on your team. And what will be brought up in another section in more detail, the 5 other players you play with are only with you for such a fleeting time that you really never have to communicate with them. In our next video, we'll look at how Overwatch demonstrates their lack of understanding when it comes to FPS level design. Thanks for watching.
Bye.